Alan Dershowitz is no stranger to high-profile and controversial clients.
I would always take on the cases that no one else would take on. You must have lawyers able to represent the most despised people in the world.
Our guest today is regarded as one of America's sharpest legal minds and toughest lawyers, the former Harvard law professor, Alan Dershowitz. He's defended dozens of famous and infamous figures over the decades, including O.J. Simpson, Mike Tyson, Harvey Weinstein, and President Donald Trump in his first impeachment trial. He also represented the late billionaire sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, winning him a so-called sweetheart deal in 2008. He then found himself accused by one of Epstein's alleged victims. We'll hear from Professor Dershowitz in a moment, but first a quick look at his long, distinguished, and sometimes controversial career.
The system says better 10 guilty go free than one innocent be wrongly confined. I've gotten guilty people acquitted of murder. I don't turn down very controversial cases. Because I was a professor with tenure, I felt I had an obligation to take on the most unpopular cases because I couldn't be fired. I've represented, and I will continue to represent, people charged with very, very serious crimes. I have never refused to represent a client, no matter how heinous the allegations are. Jeffrey Epstein was among the many who I represented. I've had over 250 cases in my career.
Dershowitz defended Epstein against sex abuse allegations in Florida more than a decade ago.
At the time, he could have faced life in prison for allegations with underage girls. Epstein served just 13 months in a county jail for those charges.
That plea deal was negotiated between the federal government and Epstein's lawyer, including Alan Dershowitz.
That's a shockingly light sentence, Professor.
Look, you should complain about the judge and about the prosecutor.
Now Alan Dershowitz is being accused of having sex with an underage girl.
She is a categorical liar. I challenge her to repeat it in public.
Epstein made me, essentially, forced me to have sex with him.
You claim you've never had relations with Virginia Giuffre.
I never met her. I never met her. I never saw her. I never met her. I never heard of her. It's a totally made-up story. My life suddenly turned from a life of honor to a life of dishonor. I'm constantly defending people that I fundamentally disagree with. I'm defending the rights of Donald Trump. I voted for Hillary Clinton. Impeaching would deny both justice to an individual and justice to our Constitution. I have only two rules. I don't represent fugitives, people who are seeking to evade justice, and I don't represent people who are in the business of committing crimes.
Well, let's hear from the man himself now, Professor Alan Dershowitz. Welcome to the Nexus. I just want to start off by saying, there are hundreds of thousands of lawyers in the United States, millions around the world, but you are arguably the best known of all. Why do you think that is?
I think I've represented a lot of complicated and controversial cases which have brought me public attention, but I'm proudest of the cases I've represented, people that nobody's ever heard of. I think the reason people come to me to be their lawyer is because I've had a successful run of winning cases, some on behalf of innocent people, some on behalf of guilty people, some on behalf of people in between guilt and innocence. I don't make distinctions based on what I believe, whether a person is guilty or innocent. I leave that to the judge and jury. I take cases based on what I believe are constitutional rights and principles of justice.
Of course, it is the famous cases that we all know you for, and other defense lawyers I spoke to in preparation for this interview have told me that they respect you greatly, and some of them are in awe of you because you're prepared to defend anyone, even if it puts your own reputation under pressure. Why is it you're prepared to take on those difficult cases which can put you in trouble as well, by association?
Because I had to be at Harvard University for 50 years, and that meant I couldn't be fired, which means I have no excuse for not following the Constitution. Look, the United States learned from Britain, learned from Blackstone, from the great English barristers, that you defend the guilty and the innocent alike. You put the defense of your client before your own interests. And I've always followed that principle. whether it be John Adams representing the people accused of the Boston Massacre, the British soldiers, or Abraham Lincoln defending guilty people,
Sure.
or Clarence Darrow. I've always tried to stand in their shadow and represent people without regard to what impact it may have on my reputation.
Now, on the face of it, that does seem quite noble in that you're standing up for the rule of law and you're prepared to take on anyone without prejudice. But I do wonder if you're standing up for the rule of law or if you are subverting it sometimes. And I ask that because, we just heard you in that report saying, I've gotten guilty people acquitted of murder. I mean, how is that standing up for the rule of law? Perhaps even you're standing up for the letter of the law, but not for the spirit of the law.
No, the spirit of the law requires that everybody be defended and that the state prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. We borrowed from the principle, better 10 guilty go free than one innocent be wrongly convicted. So, yes, occasionally I help free the guilty, but I do it in order to protect the innocent. The harder I fight on behalf of the guilty, the less likely it is that a prosecutor will prosecute innocent people. I want to make sure that every case is challenged. Sometimes that means defending the guilty. Often it means defending the innocent, but it always means defending the rule of law, both the spirit of the law and the letter of the law.
Let me repeat that point you just made. Better that 10 guilty men go free than one innocent man is incarcerated. Again, on the face of it, it sounds quite beguiling, but it also a false choice, isn't it? Why do guilty men have to go free to ensure an innocent man is not jailed? Surely the optimum outcome is that all the guilty men go to jail and the innocent man is freed.
That's just not the way human nature operates. It begins with the Bible, with Abraham arguing with God. How dare you, he said to God, sweep away the possibly innocent with the guilty? What if there are 50 innocent people in the city of Saddam? Would you sweep them away as well? We haven't figured out a way of only convicting the guilty and always acquitting the innocent. We always have to strike a balance. And acquitting the innocent sometimes requires that we err on the side of acquitting the guilty. We have to choose what kind of errors we prefer. And we prefer the era of freeing the guilty over the era of convicting the innocent.
Yeah, but it's not by accident or errors, it's by design that you have gotten guilty people acquitted of murder, and you know that. So how can you in good conscience go about defending someone you know is guilty of murder or guilty of, say, being a sex abuser?
Well, first of all, I don't often know. I learned for the trial from the... I have been mistaken. When I defended Klaus von Bülow, I initially thought he was probably guilty. And I later learned that there was no crime and he was completely innocent. I had the opposite experience as well. When I take a case initially, I'm agnostic. I don't often know whether the person is guilty or innocent. I learned that over time. If I determine that my client is guilty, I will not allow them to take the witness stand. I will never suborn perjury or allow one of my witnesses to testify falsely. But I will challenge the government at every turn and make them prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And the result is occasionally you get an innocent person convicted, and occasionally you get a guilty person convicted, a guilty acquitted. I feel much worse when I have an innocent person who is convicted than I feel when a guilty person is acquitted, because guilty people being acquitted is part of our system. Innocent people being convicted is not part of our system.
Now, Professor Dershowitz, when you've been asked about why you take on some really nefarious characters, you've often compared yourself to a doctor or a rabbi. You've said, an emergency room doctor, whoever you wheel in there will look after them. Now, I find that a bit of a fallacious analogy because the doctor, isn't hurting others when they tend to a patient. Whereas if you can get a guilty client acquitted, you are simultaneously hurting others, including the victims who made the allegations, and you are liberating your client to potentially reoffend.
When a penitent comes to a Catholic priest, seeks to do confession, the priest has to listen to him. Even if he confesses and says, go out and do terrible things to other people, there are institutional reasons why a priest must give confession to a penitent. If a mafia person comes into the emergency ward with a wound to his shooting arm, the doctor has to treat him, even though he might go out and commit more crimes. Lawyers are different. We are not allowed to help our clients commit future crimes. And if a client tells us he's going to commit a future crime, we can't take the case. We have to turn him in. But if a client has been charged with a previous crime, a past crime, then we have an obligation. Somebody's going to have to defend them. How can I tell my students, you can defend him, but I'm too good for him? I have to practice what I preach. And what I preach is that everybody's entitled to a defense, whether guilty or innocent. The nature of the defense may vary depending on whether the person's guilty or innocent, but you have to give them defense under our Constitution.
Okay, let's take the example of Jeffrey Epstein, and we're going to need a little context here for our viewers who may not be following that blow by blow. Now, you and the rest of his legal team managed to secure for him a very lenient sentence back in 2008 when Jeffrey Epstein had faced federal charges of committing sex crimes against more than 30 underage girls that could have sent him to prison for life. Now, the deal that you got him enabled him to plead guilty to 2 state charges, soliciting prostitution and soliciting prostitution with a minor under the age of 18. Now, Epstein ended up serving 13 months in a private wing of a county jail where he could come and go as he pleased. He was picked up by a chauffeur 6 days a week so he could continue his work. And, now here's the problem, according to the attorney Brad Edwards, Jeffrey Epstein abused at least one woman in West Palm Beach during his day release. Now, you and your team got him a lenient sentence, and he may well have carried on offending whilst he was on day release.
Well, of course, I didn't send him again. Once it was clear that he was committing additional crimes, not only did I stop presenting him, I terminated my relationship with him completely, and we never, ever, any kind of relationship after that again. But the reason he got the sentence is because the federal charge was weak. They couldn't sustain a federal prosecution. In order to convict for a federal crime, you have to prove that he transported women in interstate commerce, and the charges against him were all local, that all the young women were from Palm Beach. So the federal government could not successfully prosecute the case. That's why we were able to get a plea bargain whereby he pleaded to a state charge, not a federal charge. As far as how he served, I had nothing to do with that. He and his local lawyers arranged that with the local officials. If there's any complaint about that, the complaint is to the local officials or to the judge, but not to the defense attorney. The defense attorney is supposed to get the best deal he can for the client. That's the job of the defense.
Sure, and you're going to do that with the most ethical way and within the law. And yet what you're saying is that Alex Acosta, the prosecutor, the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida, made a complete mess of it, so much so that you brought him down to this plea deal.
Well, no, he didn't make a mess of it. He just didn't have the evidence. Can't create and manufacture evidence. The crimes that Epstein committed were local crimes, not federal crimes.
Well, then,
and therefore, the appropriate deal was for him to plead to the state charges and not the federal charges. So in that respect, justice was done that time. Then if he went on and committed new crimes, obviously, he was indicted and committed suicide, and I had nothing to do with any of those cases. I didn't represent a client twice.
Some of the people who...
I don't want to become the lawyer for recidivists.
Sure.
I only represent a client once, and I did it in that case, controversially, but successfully.
Was it successful because your colleague Ken Starr used his influence on Alex Acosta?
No, it was successful because the federal government didn't have a case. Ken Starr played a small role in the case. There was a team of 6 or 7 lawyers. My job was mostly to do the legal research, demonstrating that you needed to have an interstate nexus for there to be a federal prosecution. And I successfully persuaded the prosecutors that there was not a sufficient interstate nexus. And that went all the way up to the top of the Justice Department. And they agreed with the ultimate plea bargain.
As part of the Jeffrey Epstein plea deal, you secured a so-called non-prosecution agreement, which was quite remarkable, protecting Jeffrey Epstein and 4 named co-defendants and, remarkably, any unnamed potential co-conspirators. Right. This is a remarkable deal, isn't it? Why are these people so important that they need protecting from future prosecution?
Well, that was Jeffrey Epstein's wish. He said he wanted to protect the people who worked with him. Obviously, people who didn't work with him were not co-conspirators, but I wasn't part of that arrangement. That deal was made by Jeffrey Epstein and his local lawyers. I was not even aware that he had protected co-defendants until years later. The deal became a highly publicized article in the Miami.
And have you ever heard of such a deal where even unnamed potential co-conspirators are protected?
Yes, I have. It's rare, but I've heard of it. I don't know why they did that. I don't have any idea why the government agreed to that. It's not something that I myself would have asked for, but Epstein obviously wanted it. Obviously, it didn't apply to people like me. I was a lawyer in the case. I was not a co-conspirator.
Yeah.
At the time, no one had ever accused me of any impropriety. In fact, the woman who ultimately accused me, a woman I've never met to this day, the woman did accuse other people. She accused, obviously, Prince Andrew, and she accused other people by name, but she told the FBI that I was not among the people she was accusing. She wrote emails saying she had never heard of me. She told her lawyers that she didn't want to name me, but she was pressured to do so by her lawyers. And so she completely made up a story years later. If the government in any way thought that I was in any way involved in anything improper, they never would have allowed me to continue to represent Epstein in the case.
And you are, in fact, talking about Virginia Giuffre, also known as Virginia Roberts. And as you said,
right,
she alleges that she was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein to you and Prince Andrew for sex on Jeffrey Epstein's island and elsewhere. Do you still maintain you've never met her?
I've never met her. It's true. And I have emails that prove it. I was on Epstein's island once with my wife and my then 10-year-old daughter. We visited the island when it was empty. He had just bought it. We were in Guadeloupe, and he sent the plane over for us to see the island. We spent one day on the island, along with another professor at Harvard and his family. There were no young people on the island. It was entirely innocent. The only time I was ever on the island.
So you never saw any signs of impropriety while you were on Jeffrey Epstein's island?
Or anywhere else. I never saw any signs of impropriety. If I had ever seen any impropriety, I would have quit and I would have turned him in. Remember, I wasn't his lawyer at the time.
What is the litigation status between you and Virginia Giuffre or Virginia Roberts? Are you suing her and she is suing you for defamation?
I'm suing her for defamation. She's suing me for defamation. We have proved beyond any doubt that she never met me. We proved it through her own emails. So I think it's as clear as could be that this was a made-up charge. It was designed to get $1 billion from Leslie Wexner, a very, very wealthy man who was closely associated with Epstein. And I was used as a stalking horse. And they then went to Wexner and tried to shut him down for billions of dollars. The word
Speaking of Leslie Wexner, Speaking of Leslie Wexner, the founder of Victoria's Secrets, he alleges that Jeffrey Epstein stole millions from him. Can you tell us anything about their relationship or those transactions?
Well, they go back many, many, many years when both were single, and there have been all kinds of allegations trying to subpoena Leslie Wexner. He's missing it. He has something to hide. I have nothing to hide. I want everything out there. The reason I appear in all these interviews is I want the public to know I have nothing to hide. Wexner is trying to hide. Other people are trying to hide. They're refusing to testify. I've offered to go in front of the grand jury. I've asked the U.S. Attorney's Office to open an investigation of me and Virginia Giuffre. One of us is committing perjury, and it's she. And I have asked the FBI. I wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal urging the FBI to investigate me. Who's ever heard of that being done? Unless you're totally and completely innocent. I have absolutely nothing to hide.
And let me ask you,
wrong.
And let me ask you about your association with Jeffrey Epstein. I believe you said that you never associated with him after he was convicted in 2008. Let me ask you,
except as a lawyer. I mean, obviously, he called me on numerous occasions to clarify legally, but I never had a friendship or acquaintanceship with him or any kind of an academic association with him once he was convicted and once it became clear that he had committed a crime.
So once he was convicted, he did call you from time to ask you about legal issues as a lawyer. Right. He paid you money. Did you recommend the Boston lawyer Martin Weinberg to him, who was representing?
Yes.
Okay.
Martin Weinberg is an exceptional lawyer, and I did recommend. Yeah.
Right. So you were taking calls from Jeffrey Epstein as a client for money, and you were giving him advice.
I was not taking money. I was just giving him advice for cases that I had previously represented it on. Every lawyer has an obligation to do that. Your relationship with a client doesn't end when the case is over. It doesn't even end with his death. You have to continue to provide advice to him, his family.
Well, but wait a minute. You were providing Jeffrey Epstein, who is at least millionaire, possibly a billionaire, with free legal advice after he was convicted.
No, he had paid me considerable amounts of money previously, and any lawyer has an obligation to continue to take phone calls from a client after the case is terminated. That's what I did. But my relationship with him, any kind, terminated at that point. My academic relationship with him, my personal relationship with him, but of course, I couldn't refuse to answer questions.
Understood.
Also, once I was accused, I needed to talk to him and find out about who this woman, Virginia Giuffre, was. I had never heard of her. I didn't know who she was. And so I spoke to Mark Weinberg and I spoke to Jeffrey Epstein, getting information about her and finding out about her long history of telling untruths about people.
Let me ask you about a little Saturday Night Live clip, which I'd like to play for you. Just give me a second.
Sure.
Look at that. That's freaking Alan Dershowitz.
I'm in hell?
No. I mean, yes, you are. Let me explain. You're not going to hell. You're not even dying. I'm going to send you back upstairs in a minute. Honestly, I just really wanted to meet you.
Look who it is! Jeffrey Epstein! Great to see you. What are you doing here?
Hey, well, I gotta say, I love what you've been doing for the president. All we get down here is Fox News, and it's been a joy to see you work.
I wish you could have been there in person.
Yeah. It's too bad I was murdered.
I know. Trust me, I know.
So it seems to be an open joke on America's leading satire show that you know what happened to Jeffrey Epstein in jail. You know whether he killed himself or not. Why do people think that you know what happened in that cell?
Well, I have a good sense of humor, and so I'm happy to be satirized on Saturday Night Live. I have no idea what happened in the jail cell. I think he probably committed suicide. Jeffrey Epstein was a hedonist. The idea that he would have to spend the rest of his life in rat-infested cells eating food is not something I think he was willing to accept, so I suspect that he did kill himself, but I have no information. I never spoke to Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, we've spoken to a very well-known coroner in New York who said that the breaks around his neck were not consistent with suicide. And there are so many things that happened that day when the security guards weren't there, the cameras weren't on, his cellmate wasn't there. Are you telling me that if you were to bet on it, it would be that he killed himself? If I had to bet with money that I couldn't afford to lose, I would bet on suicide. But I think there is a possibility that, the prison authorities may have permitted him to commit suicide. He may have paid off some guards to turn off the camera. Or there is certainly the possibility that somebody killed him, but I'd have to see much more evidence to be convinced of that. I have an open mind. Okay, you mentioned that he got a deal with a non-prosecution agreement that is extremely rare. He got it. He's a powerful man, not just rich. Why is he so powerful? What does he know about so many people who you know as well that everyone is so afraid of? Well, he does know a lot of people. I'll never forget, I was having dinner. This is a name-dropping story, but I was having dinner with Bill and Hillary Clinton at the home of Caroline Kennedy on Martha's Vineyard. And suddenly, Bill Clinton was called away, and he picked up the phone, and he was talking on the phone for 10 minutes, off on the side. And then he came over to me and he said, Alan, somebody wants to talk to you. And he hands me the phone, and it's Jeffrey Epstein. This was obviously, before any of these things came out, it was while Clinton was still president, probably in about 1999. But obviously, he was friendly with Bill Clinton. He was friendly with Bill Gates. He was friendly with many, many, many people. He was Rothschild, who raved about him and told me he was the most wonderful man in the world. And do you think that these men had something to hide when it came to Jeffrey Epstein revealing what he knew? All I know is I'm happy to have everything come out. I want every piece of paper uncovered. I want every document revealed. I have nothing to hide. I did nothing wrong. Jeffrey Epstein's, I can't testify on behalf of anybody else. Jeffrey Epstein's former girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, currently in jail in New York, awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. How often did you meet her, and what can you tell us about her? I've met her probably times, almost always with my wife. We met her on the island. At one time we were on the island. Ghislaine was there with Jeffrey Epstein and my wife and my daughter and the two other Harvard people. I met her then. I met her in Jeffrey Epstein's house in New York, perhaps once or twice, and maybe once or twice in his house in Palm Beach. All I know, I saw her performing basically secretarial functions. Final question for you, Professor Dershowitz. I do apologise, we're running out of time. Her trial is slated for July. Do you think the trial will go ahead? What do you think is going to be the outcome? I know a lot of people who are close to the situation who tell me it'll never happen and she'll just disappear.
Oh, no, I think there'll be a trial. It's very important to know that of all the things she's accused of, none of them relate to Virginia Giuffre, because the government obviously doesn't believe Giuffre's testimony.
Professor Dershowitz, thank you so much for your contributions to the Nexus today. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. I do apologize for the audio problems there, but I think we've had quite an illuminating conversation. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.